I was living in this duplex. For the first time, I was alone.
Singles is one of those movies people point to when they talk about the 90s, like it was a golden era of authenticity, better music, better vibes, better relationships. And yeah, the music's great, but the relationships? They're a mess. Not in a dramatic Hollywood explosion kind of way, but in a quieter way. People don't know what they want. They hurt each other anyway, and then they just keep going. What makes Singles interesting isn't that it tells a story, it's that it doesn't really feel like one. It feels like you're just watching people live. Bad decisions, missed timing, and half-formed emotions included. And the more you sit with it, the more you realize this isn't a movie about love. It's a movie about people trying to connect, and mostly getting it wrong. Before we go further, welcome back to Nostalgia Couch Potato, where we revisit older movies and shows and ask whether they actually hold up. If you enjoyed this kind of breakdown, go ahead and like and subscribe. It really helps the channel and lets me know to keep making more videos like this. Now back to Singles. Singles came out in 1992, and it's set in Seattle during the grunge era. Bands like Pearl Jam, Soundgarden, and Alice in Chains shaped the atmosphere of the film. At the time, this wasn't nostalgia, it was current culture, which is why the movie doesn't feel overly polished. It feels like a snapshot of people living in that moment. Young adults in their 20s, close enough to adulthood to feel pressure, but not settled enough to know what they're doing yet. Everyone is physically close, but emotionally scattered. Singles is set in early 90s Seattle, right in the middle of the grunge scene, and follows a group of 20-somethings all living in the same apartment complex while trying, and mostly failing, to figure out dating, work, and adulthood at the same time. On the surface, it's a romantic comedy. People meet, date, break up, and circle back around each other like the world's most emotionally exhausted social experiment. But the reality is messier than the genre label suggests. You've got a woman who keeps repeating the same relationship patterns with guys who are charming just long enough to become a problem. You've got a guy who's actually stable and responsible, but keeps getting treated like he's less exciting for it. You've got a musician who treats ambition like a vibe and relationships like something that should just work out because he believes in himself hard enough. And you've got everyone else orbiting around them, all trying to act like they understand what they're doing in life when it's pretty clear they don't. What makes the movie interesting isn't that anyone has a dramatic arc where they suddenly figure everything out, it's that they don't. They keep making choices based on impulse, timing, insecurity, and whatever version of this feels right now they can justify in the moment. So instead of a clean story about love, it becomes more like a snapshot of emotional trial and error in your 20s. People overlapping, misreading each other, missing timing, reconnecting, and slowly realizing that being an adult doesn't come with the clarity they were expecting. And the movie just lets all of that sit there. No big lesson, no neat resolution, just a bunch of people in the same place trying to grow up at the same time without really knowing how. One of the first things you notice about Singles, especially watching it now, is that it feels disjointed. It doesn't move like a typical story. There's no strong central plot pulling everything forward, no single character driving the narrative from point A to point B. Instead, it kind of drifts from one person to another, from one moment to the next, like it's not in a rush to get anywhere. And honestly, that might be the point. Because if you look at it from that ritual spectacle lens we've been using, those interviews start to feel less like a gimmick and more like confessions. Like each character is trying to explain themselves, justify their choices, or maybe convince you and themselves that they actually know what they're doing. And those title cards, they feel like structure being forced on something that doesn't naturally have it. Like the movie's quietly saying, yeah, we're calling this a story, but real life doesn't really break down into neat chapters like that. And that's where the disjointed feeling starts to make more sense. Because this isn't a story about a clear journey. It's a story about a phase of life. That in-between space where you've got a job, but you're not settled, you're dating, but not really building anything, you've got friends, but everyone's kind of on their own path. So instead of a tight narrative, what you get is something closer to a collage, a collection of moments, some meaningful, some awkward, some that feel like they should matter more than they do, and some that just happen. And that's probably why parts of the movie can feel like they drag, because not every moment is pushing a plot forward. Sometimes you're just sitting with people, hanging out, talking, making decisions that don't immediately lead anywhere. It's that same feeling you mentioned, like watching real life play out. Not every scene has a purpose in the traditional sense, and depending on what you're expecting, that can feel either honest or frustrating. But here's where it gets interesting, because even though the movie feels loose, it's not random. There are anchors holding everything together: the apartment complex, the overlapping relationships, the shared social circle. It's almost like a contained ecosystem. Everybody's close enough that their lives brush up against each other, but not so connected that they're all part of the same story. And that's where it starts to resemble something closer to what we'd now call a slice of life series. Honestly, this is one of those movies that feels like it could have worked better as a TV show, because the way it's structured, multiple characters, intersecting storylines, uneven pacing, it's built for something episodic, where you could spend more time with each person without it feeling like the movie's constantly pulling away to check in on someone else. Instead, as a film, it creates this push and pull feeling. Just as you start getting invested in one story, you're pulled into another. And sometimes that works, and sometimes it feels like, okay, can we stay here for a second? But that unevenness actually feeds into something bigger. Because when you step back and look at the whole thing, the structure itself starts to reflect what the characters are going through. Their lives aren't clean. Their relationships aren't linear. Their decisions don't always lead to clear outcomes. So the movie doesn't pretend they do. And that's where Singles kind of separates itself from something like Reality Bites. Even when that movie jumps between characters, it still has a clear center, a core relationship holding everything together. Singles doesn't really give you that. It gives you a group, a space, a moment in time, and just lets you sit in it. Which means the disjointed feeling isn't really a flaw. It's part of the experience. Because instead of telling you a story with a beginning, middle, and end, it drops you into the middle of a bunch of lives and then quietly steps back. And once you realize that, the question really isn't, where is this story going? It becomes, what are these people actually doing with their lives? And that's where things start to get a lot more interesting. By the time you reach the end of Singles, there isn't really a traditional sense of resolution. No big emotional breakthrough, no clean pairings where everything suddenly clicks into place. No moment where everyone collectively figures it out. And honestly, that feels intentional. Because if there's one thing the film has been doing the entire time, it's resisting the idea that life in your 20s actually organizes itself into neat conclusions. What you're left with instead is something closer to continuation. People move forward, but not in a straight line. Relationships end, but don't fully disappear. People change, but not in ways that are immediately visible or satisfying. Everything keeps going, but slightly off balance. And that's where the movie starts to feel less like a story and more like a record of a phase of life. A snapshot of people who are all in different ways trying to figure out how to exist as adults without really understanding what adulthood is supposed to feel like yet. Because even though the setting is very specific, early 90s Seattle, grunge era, that whole cultural moment, the emotional core isn't really tied to that time period. It's something more universal. That feeling of being old enough to be responsible for your life, but not experienced enough to trust the decisions you're making in it. And that's why the movie can feel both familiar and frustrating at the same time. Familiar because you recognize the uncertainty. Frustrating because nobody really solves it. But if you step back from the individual relationships, the chaos, the miscommunication, the emotional back and forth, there's something consistent underneath it all. Not romance, not even failure, but process. Everyone in this movie is in some kind of transition, trying to figure out what they want, trying to figure out who they're compatible with, trying to figure out what being an adult actually looks like in real time. And none of it happens cleanly. It's trial and error, sometimes more error than trial, which is why the film's structure makes more sense the more you sit with it, because it never really pretends these people are on a shared journey towards a shared outcome. They're just overlapping, living near each other, influencing each other, re-entering each other's lives at inconvenient times, and then continuing on. So when people talk about Singles as a romantic comedy, it kind of misses the point, because there's not really a central romantic arc holding everything together. Instead, what you get is something closer to a group study of emotional instability at a very specific moment in life. Because whether you connect with it or you just kind of sit there wondering what everyone's doing half the time, it still captures something real about that moment in the early 90s and that weird space between youth and adulthood. But that's just my take. Let me know what you think down in the comments. Did Singles feel relatable or just chaotic? And if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe to Nostalgia Couch Potato for more retro movie and TV breakdowns. As always,
Have fun. Stay single.
thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.